President Donald Trump attempted to gain the upper hand in his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Body language experts often analyze every gesture, such as the handshake Trump used as a dominating action, to display power, or standing positions to assess the subtle power struggle and the actual level of intimacy and tension between the two sides. Donald Trump is known as a leader with a non-traditional communication style, making his body language a focal point for experts. But this time, Trump met Xi. One was expressive and one was reserved, making the negotiation outcomes even harder to predict. In the first meeting between the two leaders after 6 years on October 30th in Busan, South, U.S. President Donald Trump walked onto the stage from the left, stood waiting, and greeted the reporters below. Tracy Brown, an American body language and behavior analysis expert, believes President Trump seemed to arrive early, to occupy a visually advantageous position, aiming to demonstrate power control even before the meeting began.
Brown noted that he stood on the left, a power position often favored by politicians.
President Xi was then escorted onto the stage by an assistant. "Mr. President, this is the President of the People's Republic," the assistant introduced while Trump proactively extended his hand towards Xi and smiled. Patty Gould, an expert in body language and nonverbal communication, believes politicians often proactively extend their hand first to shake the opponent's hand to display.
However, Trump's handshake did not create this impression.
The expert further noted that in the initial greeting, it was interesting to see Trump's palm facing upward. That is not a common sign, as it conveys a humble attitude. Brown also thought Trump's upward palm when welcoming Xi aimed to show a welcoming, hospitable attitude rather than dominance from the start. As the two continued to interact, Trump began using more power-displaying gestures, such as placing his left hand on Xi's back, slightly loosening his right hand then tightening it again as they gripped, and Brown said that was an action intended to show control. Expert Gould commented that Trump's physical contact with Xi showed consistency. Trump did what he often does by pulling Xi's hand toward his own body. He performed a dominating action by pulling, rather than stopping and shaking hands normally. Trump holding Xi's hand for quite a long time was also noteworthy, because that is not standard diplomatic protocol.
He repeated this action once again, although this is his familiar style,
typically in meetings between world leaders. The handshake should not turn into a confrontation in the eyes of many. Gould noted that leaders usually shake hands about 3 to 5 times before releasing, rarely holding on tightly until reporters start asking questions, as in Trump and Xi's meeting. Gould said after shaking hands and waiting about 3 times, the Chinese president slightly leaned toward the journalist,
a sign indicating he was ready to end the greeting part.
But Trump at that time still faced Xi and held his hand tightly. A normal handshake is when both maintain equal arm distance, but when Trump pulled and held Xi's hand in front of himself, he was demonstrating that he was the dominant one. After analyzing hundreds of handshakes between leaders, Gould said they usually end with a smile or a joke. But Trump needed a unnatural smile while saying that Xi is a tough negotiator. Ending the press greeting part,
Trump signaled to invite Xi to leave the stage to their left.
"Let's go." However, the assistant had be heard inviting the leaders to go in another direction.
Which way? To me, that situation was strange.
She believed that somewhat undermined the power position Trump had sought to build from the start of the meeting, because he didn't know which way to go. And before that, President Trump tried to restrain his emotions when South Korea presented him with, but his body language showed he was very excited. According to body language expert Judy Zine, the moment he was given the crown,
he couldn't take his eyes off it.
That's a typical reaction when a gift truly pleases the recipient,
showing he became extremely excited at that moment.
Although his mouth remained closed, he slept. This is a body movement signaling joy being maximally restrained. The British expert believed Trump subsequently couldn't hide his joy. His face lit up with a genuine smile. Then he shook hands while putting his arm around President Lee Myung-bak. Zine considered this a gesture showing the desire for a tight hug while maintaining moderation,
while expressing warm gratitude.
Trump said during the ceremony that this golden crown was truly special and the Mununga medal was absolutely. The American president expressed that he wanted to wear it. The South Korean representative stated the crown symbolizes the sacred connection between heavenly power and earthly power, as well as the spirit of peace on the Korean peninsula. President Lee explained that the golden crown represents the spirit of Silla, the first period of peace and prosperity on the, while expressing the hope to open a new golden era for the Korea-US alliance. According to initial predictions by international affairs analysts, the meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping achieved modest results. And as expected, President Trump would highlight this success, while President Xi Jinping would speak modestly about the importance of bilateral relations. To avoid provoking tension in Washington at a time when China's economy is facing numerous difficulties. Gregory Poling, Southeast Asia Program Director, Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, Center for Strategic and International Studies Analyst, said this resembles a partial ceasefire and warned us this development temporarily suspends or partially reduces punitive act that Washington and Beijing have imposed on each other in recent months. This U.S.-China agreement essentially reversed the punitive measures both sides had announced over the past 2 months, returning both countries to the pre-September trade pact.
China might conclude that their escalation strategy has been effective
by threatening to impose strict export licensing requirements on rare earth magnets and other critical minerals. Beijing succeeded in making Washington withdraw tariff impositions. Then corresponding export control measures in both countries' actions to increase port fees will be suspended for 1 year. However, the agreement still cannot resolve fundamental disagreement. As Pauline commented, what Trump and Xi achieved doesn't solve the structural economic issues
that sparked the trade war from the beginning.
Details about some parts of the agreement remain unconfirmed and likely incomplete. For example, how much agricultural and energy products China will purchase, and whether there will be major Chinese investments in the U.S. in the future,
and whether the investments align with the America First investment policy document issued in February. According to other observations, there have been no signs so far that U.S.
and Chinese trade negotiators plan to address long-standing disagreements in bilateral trade relations, such as Beijing's widespread implementation of state subsidy policies for domestic, restricting foreign companies' access to important sectors of the Chinese market, and the situation of commercial secret theft through cyber.
President Trump's promise to visit Beijing in April
2026 and Xi's reciprocal visit to Washington seem overly optimistic.
It's necessary to recognize that both sides haven.
Regardless of commercial outcomes, countries in the Indian and Pacific Oceans will feel relieved as Washington and Beijing temporarily pause escalation. Additionally, regional economies have also noticed some other positive points recently. That is the agreement between the U.S. and Japan to strengthen the alliance.
X's visit to Malaysia for the ASEAN summit demonstrates Washington.
Of course, countries in the Indian and Pacific Oceans desire a stable relationship, and they expect the U.S. to contribute more rather than less.
The tactic of pausing trade tensions will bring temporary relief.
For Southeast Asia and the global economy, I believe the U.S.-China summit achieved an acceptable outcome. They neither worsened trade tensions nor reached a major agreement that would disadvantage other Asian countries. This contributes to America's interests and is an investment from Washington. For Southeast Asia and the global economy, I believe the U.S.-China summit delivered. As for Southeast Asia and the world economy, I think the U.S.-China summit.
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.